Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I once again thank you for your leadership in putting forward a strong, solid budget that helps us to move toward dealing with our fiscal crisis in this country. And before discussing this specific budget resolution, I'd like to respond a little bit to some of the criticisms that have been leveled against you and us for last year's budget and for our efforts to try to resolve the fiscal issues we're facing. There's been some criticism about using reconciliation to pass tax reform. Every member of this committee knows that reconciliation is the process by used to deal with tax reform most of the time in the last decade or more. Let's take a look at what has happened. According to recent reports from the Congressional Budget Office that compared its January 2017 forecast against its January 2019 forecast, the cumulative increase, and I said increase, in projected GDP in our economy over 2017 to 2027 is $7.17 trillion. That's the increase since we've passed our tax reform and it started moving. Of that increase, CBO notes that the 2017 tax reform law accounts for more than $2.3 trillion of the increase in our projected economic growth over the next decade. Other policy changes enacted in the last Congress and by this Congress, the Republicans and their leadership on this and the Trump administration now account for another $1.3 trillion in projected economic growth. Mr. Chairman, it wasn't that long ago that we were told by everyone that low growth in our economy was the new norm and projections were showing a sub 2% annual growth as far as the eye could see. Since the enactment of tax reform, economic growth has averaged 3.1%, and the real benefits are being seen by American families and workers across the spectrum. Job creation is up, unemployment is low, wages are rising at the fastest rate in decades, particularly for lower-income workers. This good economic news will also provide policymakers with greater flexibility to address other important fiscal challenges. CBO estimates that a 0.1% annual increase in GDP over 10 years would result in $307 billion in deficit reduction. And as I indicated, we're already seeing far more than that. Mr. Chairman, I appreciate that this budget proposes additional important steps to address our debt and deficit challenges from the spending side. I particularly appreciate and support your proposal to zero out chimps, or changes in mandatory programs. It was exactly 10 years ago that I first raised the issue of chimps at the fiscal year 2010 budget resolution markup in this committee. To my knowledge, the first time anyone had sought to expose and work to eliminate this gimmick. My efforts initially focused on the Crime Victims Fund. For more than 3 decades, the Victims of Crime Act, or VOCA, has been providing critical fund support to victims' service organizations and direct compensation to victims of crime. These grants come from a fund that is financed not by taxpayer dollars, but through fines, forfeitures, and penalties collected from those who commit crimes, with fund resources then going to help those who have been victims of all types of crime. VOCA-funded state victim assistance grants support direct services such as emergency shelter, crisis intervention, and counseling. Over 3.7 million victims of all types of crime every year. As of 2018, the VOCA Fund had a balance of more than $12 billion. Starting in 2000, Congress placed an annual cap on how much could be spent out of the fund to support victims of crime. In part, this was done to ensure a stable long-term funding stream to protect against annual fluctuations in deposits. However, the spenders and a number of policymakers in Congress also saw this cap as an opportunity to create a gimmick to allow the government to spend billions more each year on programs unrelated to crime victims by offsetting that additional spending against the VOCA fund balance that was held back in the cap each year. It could be spent again and again, year after year, with never accounting for it. As a result of this gimmick, Congress has spent tens of billions of non-taxpayer, non-general fund dollars on unrelated programs at the expense of victims. My efforts over the years to bring attention to and eliminate this gimmick have generated an increased amount of bipartisan support, just as the problem itself has been a bipartisan problem over the years. Progress in fully eliminating the chimp gimmick, not just for the Crime Victims Fund, but with regard to all similar chimps, has been gradual, much slower than I would have liked to see. Senator Toomey has also been a strong champion in pushing to eliminate all chimps, and others from the sides and others from both sides have been supportive of this effort. Progress has been made, and I certainly appreciate your decision, Mr. Chairman, to propose fully zeroing out all chimps in this budget. The budget before us would build on the strong economic foundation we built in the last 2 years and take some important steps on the spending side to move our fiscal posture in the right direction. I appreciate your leadership, Mr. Chairman.